Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Sami Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Thanks.
There's still a lot of uncertainty surrounding the North Korea-U.S. summit. It's gone through numerous twists and turns. Is this making your coverage of the issue rather difficult?
It keeps us very busy. We get now phone calls over the weekend when President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un suddenly meet Saturday night.
Right.
And then Sunday morning, President Moon holds a press briefing, and so there our weekend is gone. And so there are a lot of unexpected new developments, but the basic framework working towards this summit, there seems to be some narrowing of choices at this point where we're at, what the summit will be dealing with. It seems to have narrowed down more the definition of denuclearization.
Okay, and how's your work been going as a journalist?
Well, Brian's right. It's been busy, and I've pulled a few all-nighters covering the developments, a lot of activity. And I'm asked to comment a lot on that from out in Seoul. And for me, it'd be more natural to provide a Seoul reaction, or perhaps what the South Korean government's thinking. But we're not analyzing things happening over there, which is a change for me.
Okay, and Matt, how's it going for you?
I agree with that too. It's been unpredictable and exciting, but also the center of gravity of the story has in some ways shifted from Seoul. Though I'll still think Moon Jae-in is very much in the driver's seat here, but. Our Washington bureau is much more interested in coverage of the story now, and so I'm having to fight to get my piece of stories, whereas it used to be the entire burden was on me.
The North Korea-U.S. summit, which had been on the brink of cancellation, has been revived once again.
It could even be the 12th. We're talking to them now. They very much want to do it. We'd like to do it. We're going to see what happens. We're meeting with the chairman on June 12th. And I think it's probably going to be a very successful, ultimately a successful process. We'll see. Remember what I say. We will see what we will see.
Trump's cabinet officials also signaled that they were ready to hold the North Korea-U.S. summit according to schedule.
We're always going to be prepared, and if the meeting takes place on June 12th, we'll be ready.
That's usual give and take, you know, of trying to put together big summits and stuff. So diplomats are still at work.
On May 26th, President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met on short notice, further raising the possibility that the North Korea-U.S. summit will take place after all.
북미 양국 간에 상대가 무엇을 원하고 있는지 라는 것을 분명히 인식하는 가운데 지금 회담이 추진되고 있기 때문에 실무 협상도 또 6월 12일에 본 회담도 잘 되리라고 기대하고 있습니다.
Summit preparations gained further traction as senior officials from North Korea and the United States began holding working-level talks. On May 27th, former U.S. ambassador to South Korea Song Kim, a renowned Korea expert, met with senior North Korean diplomat Choi Son-hui for multiple discussions in Panmunjom. Meanwhile, over in Singapore, the venue of the North Korea-U.S. summit, Kim Chang-son, the director of North Korea's State Affairs Commission, met with Joe Hagan, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. According to reports, the pair reached an agreement on the details of the summit, such as the precise location as well as security details. Elsewhere, Kim Yong-chol, vice chairman of the Workers' Party Central Committee, traveled to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to arrange details for the upcoming Pyongyang-Washington summit.
This was a meeting where a letter was given to me by Kim Jong-un, and that letter was a very nice letter. Oh, would you like to see what was in that letter? Would you like? How much? How much? How much?
This week on Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of foreign journalists to discuss the meeting in more detail. US President Donald Trump is seemingly once again open to the idea of a Pyongyang-Washington summit. Did you expect such a quick turnaround when he first sent the cancellation letter to Kim Jong-un?
I didn't know what to expect. I think if his strategy was to be unpredictable, he succeeded, because when he canceled it. I think the rest of the world just thought that the summit was off, at least for June 12th, and perhaps it could get resurrected perhaps down the line, maybe a few months later, after intense negotiations at lower levels are completed. The fact that it looks closer to being back on track for June 12th and in Singapore is very surprising.
Very surprising.
I can't say I expected the quick turnaround. Some people have suggested perhaps what Trump was doing was trying to evoke a reaction from North Korea after North Korea had made some threatening or crass comments regarding the U.S. administration, and Trump wanted to level the playing field, got what he wanted in a very, measured response from North Korea, and then, felt all along like it was still worth pushing forward. But it's been so much back and forth. I don't think I've been able to anticipate most of the moves from both North Korea and the U.S. at this point.
Right. Matt, what do you think explains the constant back and forth? Is this just a part of his negotiating strategy?
Well, you have two unpredictable leaders. You have an unpredictable nation in North Korea, and you have Donald Trump, who has been surprising people for his entire administration. And for me, reading the letter, the tone of it suggested that he still was hopeful that this summit could happen at some point this year, perhaps.
Right. Do you think it reflects some kind of internal dissent within the Trump cabinet?
Yes, I think there's definitely internal dissent. You've seen that from people like Pompeo, who have been open to dialogue. And then you see people like National Security Advisor John Bolton, who've made very hardline statements that have angered the North. And there is internal dissent, and perhaps Trump is the one who's finally weighed in and that he wants this summit.
Okay, do you think North Korea might pull a similar move and postpone or cancel the whole summit altogether at the last minute?
Well, the nagging question is whether or not they can agree to some sort of plan before the summit on, reaching denuclearization. It isn't clear if that'll come soon or it'll be a drawn-out plan for denuclearization. If they can't reach that, and at least North Korea doesn't see it's worth its time to sit down because it's not going to get a deal it enjoys, then sure, it's possible they may pull out, but that applies to the U.S. as well. Do we spend the time holding this summit if we know that we're not going to be able to see eye to eye or find common ground anywhere?
Right, okay.
I agree with Bruce, particularly over this issue of this wide gap between what North Korea wants, which is this phased-in, over time denuclearization process with sanctions relief up front, versus what the Trump administration wants, which seems to be, most analysts that I talk to, seems to be almost impossible to achieve, which would be the complete and rapid denuclearization of North Korea.
Okay. Now, the U.S. mentioned the idea of CVIG in exchange for CVID. How sincere do you think the U.S. is about security guarantee for North Korea?
I think they could be serious. It will depend on how it's defined and whether the North Koreans trust it. The Washington just has taken steps to walk away from the Iran deal.
The Iran deal is defective at its core. The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
So what kind of trust will another country have in some sort of agreement? If there is an agreement, it feels like a security agreement. It feels like it might need to be multilateral, where China's involved and other people are involved, to sort of add a little bit more trust on the North side.
Okay, what's your view?
There's been some, speaking of the Iran deal, there's been some buzz now about whether or not it would be worth considering allowing North Korea to keep the facilities to produce nuclear fuel for peaceful means. I mean, that was part of the Iran deal. They would have that capability after so many years. Trump has pulled out of that. So it really kind of makes it hard for him to approach North Korea at this point by saying, well, you also eventually someday be able to power the homes in your impoverished nation with a nuclear reactor of this kind. It doesn't help to build on good faith and security if you don't have that kind of aspect, and pulling out of the Iran deal really highlights that there's not a lot of faith in that regard.
Right. Okay. And how do you think the two sides might differ in terms of defining what a security guarantee is?
I think that is an open question. I think for the U.S., the security guarantee would be more a commitment that the U.S. would not lead an attack against North Korea, but I don't think it would imply in any way that the U.S. would help keep the Kim family regime in power if popular support faded over time. And from the North Korean side, I think that I think at some point they would certainly want to see the U.S. military drills reduced or eliminated. They would want to see perhaps some sort of reduction in the U.S. military presence, or they may just use that as leverage from other concessions. I am not sure what would satisfy North Korea on the national security issue.
Okay. Now let's move on to what's been happening in New York. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Workers' Party Vice Chairman Kim Jong-chol met in New York. Do you think these two are the right men to finalize summit preconditions?
Yes, I do. Mike Pompeo has a rapport with Kim Jong-un and also has the president's ear and vice versa. So the two men come to the negotiating table with the trust of the other that they'll be heard by their respective leaders.
Right. Now let's talk about the military drills. On May 29th, North Korea's state-run media announced that the joint military drills must be suspended as a precondition to the Kim-Trump meeting. Do you think Seoul and Washington should consider ceding to these demands?
I don't think it would ultimately impact North Korea's interest in a June 12th summit if they agree to continue these drills. North Korea has been back and forth on that issue this year. They made it abundantly clear that certain drills could continue and then walked that back during the aerial exercises just a couple weeks back. But it's hard to say exactly what they're signaling by the back and forth. But I think that does leave room for annual drills to continue taking place. Those drills have never been used to invade North Korea, to launch attacks on North Korea. And I think you have to give and take in moments like this, and I don't think the North Koreans would push back too hard if they did not agree to discontinue those drills.
I agree. I think this is another one of those sort of intractable issues that it's just so difficult to get around. The problem for the United States and for South Korea, one is language. With the United States military, it's turnover. People don't stay in this country very long, and so they have to practice. Even if they say the drills are only defensive, they're still, in many ways, the military considers them very important in terms of if a war were to break out. That the communication between the two countries needs to work, and the communication and coordination among the various troops in the United States forces need to work. So it's very difficult for me to see them being suspended completely, but there could really be an effort to dial down the media announcement of them, to reduce the scale of them, to try to lower the tensions about them.
I think we've already seen some reduction and scaling back of these drills compared to years past. And I also wonder if Washington and Seoul have the same position on these military drills. I think Washington has a much stronger in favor position that these drills must continue, where the Moon Jae-in administration has been more flexible and initially requested that these drills be postponed during the Olympics. So I do think that these drills could become part of the negotiations very quickly. You could see a scaling back. There is the issue of annual training and troop redeployment here. I did notice, I think in the last week or two, that South Korean forces are going to participate in a broader multilateral military exercise, and maybe that would be the path forward for South Korea in the future. So I think it is. I think it's part of the negotiation process right now.
Okay. So if we talk about South Korea as well in all of this, the second Inter-Korean summit in the space of just a month was held on May 26th when President Moon met with Kim Jong-un on short notice. So what's your take on that meeting?
The most important aspect to me was that it was requested by the North Korean side. So that signaled that Kim Jong-un was unnerved by the Trump cancellation of the summit and sought President Moon's help and assistance to figure this out and perhaps salvage the summit. So I think that it turned out to be somewhat of a productive meeting in that followed some conciliatory messages came from KCNA, and then Trump responded by saying, well, we'll see what's going to happen, and it could happen in June as planned. And I think that kind of helped to restart the road towards the summit.
Okay. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in the joint statement they released, Moon said that he and Kim agreed that direct talks between North Korea and the U.S. are imperative to move this process forward. Kim seemed to agree to that step, and it really kind of returned us to an atmosphere where this was a distinct possibility of happening. I don't think President Moon wasted any time considering Kim's invitation. He really seems to be the guy who is steering the ship, and that's even more obvious now that he wants to perhaps take part in the Singapore summit, if in fact it is held.
Okay.
And for me, I'm just outside of the implications for Washington and for the potential Singapore summit, it was just astonishing that these two leaders just drive and get together secretly, almost secretly, after the enmity that they've had for so many years, and that the previous summits have required so much pre-negotiation and pomp and circumstance. To me, going forward on the peninsula, whatever happens with Washington, the fact that there might be two leaders in these two countries that can just get on the phone and meet, to me is a really heartening development.
It was also, I noticed that this somewhat exemplified President Moon's role in this whole process. He has been unflappable during the cancellation and the build-up to the cancellation summit. North Korea criticized the U.S. but took measures against South Korea. It held back the South Korean journalists from traveling to North Korea. It canceled the inter-Korean talks. President Moon did not slap back in any way. He stayed on point. He stayed open to negotiation, kept pushing for dialogue, traveled to Washington to keep Trump on track for the summit, and when that failed, quickly pivoted and met with Kim about it. So I think this really exemplified his role as mediator and his role in somewhat taking a self-effacing position and letting others take credit for developments.
Right. Now let's move on to the regional powers aside from the two Koreas and the US. First of all, Japan. So there is a summit meeting scheduled between Washington and Japan on June 7th. Do you think this meeting will set a foundation, a strong, meaningful foundation for the Kim-Trump summit?
I think so. I think Japan just needs continued reassurance from the United States and from other allies about this process going forward, and that they won't be forgotten.
Japan is uncomfortable with any potential positive outcome for this summit. They are concerned that they would be further isolated out here. They are concerned about the inter-Korean relations improving and turning against Japan.
Right.
They are concerned about the U.S. kind of withdrawing support from the region. They are feeling ignored by North Korea and not getting any feedback or meeting about the Japanese who have been abducted by North Korea over the years. And also, I think Japan is more nuanced and complex than the Abe government itself. Abe is in a difficult period with shrinking support within the country, and so he is a hardliner, taking a hard line, and I'm not sure if he is representative of the popular will at this time.
Right. Okay. Now let's move on from Japan to China. What role do you think Beijing will play in helping to facilitate an agreement towards formally ending the Korean War?
Well, obviously their signatures needed, right? I think they can play a role in reassuring the North that taking positive steps on the diplomatic front can help them economically, that maybe some of the sanctions that have been imposed upon them and the actual strict sort of interpretation of those sanctions by China might be loosened. I think they can play a positive role in reassuring the North to continue through this process.
Okay. Now, some pundits have opined, they've suggested that one of the reasons Donald Trump initially cancelled the summit was to send a warning message to Beijing to not meddle in North Korea and U.S. affairs. What's your take on that?
That's a possibility. I mean, China has played a significant role in North Korea's existence for decades now, and it's come to a point where China is finally in a position where it's uncomfortable with what the leadership in North Korea is doing. You know, they've had this two-tier system of keeping North Korea weak but not too weak. And, you know, the reliance is the big brother, North Korea is the client state, and that relationship may be turning. And as the summit progresses and we see more positive signs the U.S. and North Korea could possibly reach a deal, that continues to isolate China further in its relationship with North Korea. So perhaps, yes, maybe this is a signal, but it's hard to say.
Okay. Now, finally, Russia. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with Kim Jong-un and he called for the phased lifting of sanctions on North Korea. Why do you think the Kremlin is not in full support of the US's maximum pressure policy?
First of all, Russia is more of a marginal player in all of this. They don't have the economic connections or impact with North Korea to play a significant role at this time. Its position on North Korea, well, I guess it wants to keep North Korea as a strong counterbalance to the U.S. U.S. power in the region. I would think that's their main driving concern. And they, at the same time, Russia as well as China wants stability in the region.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think it has to do with American influence, and beyond you know, militaries, you have the economic aspect to it all. And if Russia can have any influence in maintaining the state of North Korea as it is, I think it would be better for them in the long run if they can have some sort of economic cooperation through the entire peninsula, whether it's pipelines or freight on truck and train. If the U.S. has more influence, especially into the north and perhaps a unified peninsula where the American presence is strong, that kind of leaves Russia out. So it's in their best interest to keep the U.S. as far down the peninsula as possible.
Right, okay. Now I'll move on to the final question. What do you think are some of the main differences in how the two Koreas and the U.S. define a successful Pyongyang-Washington summit outcome?
Clearly, the denuclearization word is the key issue, and whether we're going to see the United States actually demand an immediate disarmament or dismantlement, or whether it might be something more like the Pakistan model, where they sort of dismantle their weapons but retain control of them, and they're somewhat monitored. So if they decided to use them again, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see. But really, clearly, that's the #1 issue outside of the military drills and the sanctions.
Okay.
Well, President Moon, after he met with Kim last week, he emphasized that Washington and Pyongyang and Seoul all have the same long-term goal. They all agree to denuclearization. It's how to get there and how long it will take. And I think Seoul is seems to support, or has seemed to be more supportive of a more compromised position that would phase in the ending of the nuclear program over time, where Washington is demanding this kind of immediate dismantlement of the program. Although that could be a negotiating, part of the negotiation process to kind of call for the impossible at the beginning and then to gain greater leverage. So yes, this is something we won't know, and we probably won't know until the summit. I think these negotiations now are going on in private, and we're not going to hear in the press the results, and probably that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps just to build a little bit on what they said. I mean, we've had frameworks in the past where there was a goal of a long-term drawdown, and ultimately that didn't work. And we have the North Korean nuclear program as it is today, or at least is what we think it is, or what they want us to believe it is. So yeah, there's reason for the Trump administration to push hard right now for quick verification of the dismantlement of the nuclear program, but I don't think they're going to get it. And I think patience are key right now, and President Moon is going to continue to urge this in the right direction as far as denuclearization, and it may just take more time, but he wants to keep room open for negotiations and hope for that breakthrough to emerge at some point.
What deal could be struck to end the nuclear program? We are not really getting any sort of feedback or conjecture about what concessions will be given to North Korea, and I think that is just as important. What is the U.S. willing to give up to get North Korea's cooperation?
Right. Okay, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'll have to wrap up there. Thank you. There's been a flurry of diplomacy around the world this past week over the on-again, off-again North Korea-U.S. summit meeting. Hopefully these efforts will not go to waste, but lead to a successful Pyongyang-Washington summit. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.